Hello. I'm Aaron. I'm a father of a 9-year-old daughter in 4th grade. And I just want to say a few words about my personal parental experience running up against Common Core standards. There is a big picture argument against Common Core. We've heard some of it here today. That's not what I can bring to the table. There's constitutional arguments. I'm not here to make those as well. I just want to give a personal anecdote. And there are personal anecdotes out there that are complete horror stories of kids whose lives have been severely stunted and perhaps even ruined by Common Core. That's also not what I'm fortunately bringing to the table today in terms of my story. My story is I have a spectacular and intelligent 9-year-old girl. Every parent thinks their kid's intelligent. I'm sure of it, so I'm the exception that absolutely objectively knows it's true. And she's in 4th grade now. When she was in 1st grade, starting in kindergarten, but really accelerating in 1st grade, I would be pulled into parent-teacher conferences and told that in terms of her reading ability, she is at 100% of reading retention, 100% at reading comprehension. She is too slow words per minute compared to the standards that are required for her to advance. And what that means is she was stopping while she was reading, going off in tangents on her head, because as she absorbed the material, she made connections between other parts of the reading she was doing and other things she had learned. She was doing applied learning. She was taking knowledge from one place and applying it to another, and that was knocking down her words per minute. Her teachers understood that fully, and that was a big problem, because she has to meet a words per minute requirement, and that is that. And I didn't think too much of it, because the overall gist of it is she is intelligent, she is getting it, and she's a little slow about finishing a particular passage. So what? The spirit of the whole exercise is to be curious, contemplative, creative, to make connections, to apply your knowledge, and she's doing all of that. In 1st grade, towards the end, I was pulled into a meeting with the principal, guidance counselor, teacher, and others, explaining to me that this words per minute thing is not something you can just ignore. It will keep her from, this is 2012, advancing past 3rd grade. At the time, that was the requirement. If she does not meet the standard, she does not advance, regardless of how well she absorbs, how many connections she makes, how curious, contemplative, and creative she is. It does not matter. She must read this fast. So all you need to do is get her to be less curious, less contemplative, less creative, apply, and make fewer connections so that she can read faster. Once you do that, once you make her less than, she can pass the standards. And sure enough, we did that. We focused on speed over applying knowledge, speed over being curious, contemplative, and creative. It hasn't ruined her life, but it made her a little less than she should have been, a little less enjoying the experience of reading and applying knowledge than she should have had. And that's the point. The best case scenario is if you make yourself a little less than, you can meet the standards. And that shouldn't be a federally mandated situation. Not when the teachers are telling me one thing and the standards are demanding another. And that's my personal story with it. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tracy Langston, and it's really an honor to be here with you today. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for what you do. I'm a mom, and I'm an activist, and I want to share something that's a mom experience. Mine could have been a horror story, but thankfully we turned the corner before it was. My family had the opportunity to adopt twin 3-year-olds about 8 years ago, and they were subject to fetal alcohol exposure and drug exposure, and so they are somewhat developmentally delayed. When they were 5, they had the chance to go to an excellent charter school, which touts itself as being one of the only schools to have successfully implemented Common Core. In the 2 weeks that they were there, my kids reverted to traumatic stress behaviors that they experienced when they were undergoing the transition from their foster family to a new home. They started hiding under desks. They were biting the teacher, kicking, spitting, doing these things because they were being held to a standard that was completely inappropriate for their developmental level. And the fact is that the Common Core standards are developmentally inappropriate for kindergarten through 3rd grade. And their experience is not unusual. If you research this, you'll find out maybe that's not what happened to your kids or what happens to kids that you know, but this happens to a lot of children, that they're being traumatized, so much so that a principal in New York who had supported Common Core came out against it, and she said that we're going to lose a whole generation of students if we don't realize that it's a lot easier to make up a deficiency in learning than to take a kid who's been taught to hate school because they've been traumatized and try to get them to like learning again. And thankfully we found another path for our kids, but I just want to let you know it's a really big danger for the kids out there, and I hope that that we can change the track that we're on. Thanks a lot.
Darrell, Colvin, Gilbert School Board. There's a scripture that says, "Tempt not the Lord thy God," and standing on a podium during a thunderstorm just seems like it's a violation of that scriptural counsel. Some stand right here. Pardon me? They should. Anyway, I've been deleting the entirety of my talk because of time. Just to say this, that I'm father of 6. My very last son is still in the Gilbert Public Schools where I serve on the board. I opted him out of the testing, and I did it very publicly. Now, I didn't get the kind of trouble that you might get because I'm on the board, so they didn't dare. And they treated me very politely, and I kind of wonder how they would otherwise. But I did announce it from the dais. I felt like that was an important thing to do from a leadership position, and I was mocked by a hostile crowd that we often have for that, but I'd do it again anyway. And so let me close with this, that if you're like me and you're really fed up with the surveillance in our society where we, the public, are becoming increasingly transparent, while at the same time the government is becoming increasingly opaque and hostile, the absence of data, like I did in opting my son out, the absence of data is still data. The title of the talk I was going to give you is called Follow the Money, and that money is driven by corporate fascism, corporatist fascism, and that's an area where right and left can get together and know that the corporate America, in conjunction with the federal and sometimes state government, does not have your children's best interests at heart, but it's a corporate bottom line. And I'll stay in the fight with all of you here, and thanks for staying, and I'll turn it over to our last speaker.
Hello. I'm here as a Christian and a patriot. And some of you may be around to remember when Christianity was officially booted out of school. You've heard the name John Dewey. He was weeding Christianity through his teachers' colleges out since the 1920s. But it was official, back in the 50s, I believe it was. Christianity is out. It doesn't mean that religion is out. It's just been replaced by another religion. You heard about some of that religion. It's called secular humanism, John Dewey's religion. In fact, he wrote a sermon book on secular humanism. Now, secular humanism has morphed into a new religion. That religion is cultural Marxism. If you've never heard the term cultural Marxism before, the common name for cultural Marxism is political correctness. Multicultural diversity, normalization of homosexuality, social justice, the extreme environmental movement, those are all elements of cultural Marxism that is rampant through the whole school system across the nation. Christian children, or children coming from Christian homes, are being de-Christianized the more years they spend in the public school. Every single study that takes a look at it proves it. The only way you're going to stop the de-Christianization of your children, if you want to raise them in a Christian environment, is to pull them out of public school, period. And yeah, I'll get to that. If you've heard R.J. Rushdoony, he kind of summarized it for so many Christians. To control the future requires the control of education and of the child. Hence, for Christians to tolerate statist education or to allow their children to be trained thereby means to renounce the power of Christianity in society, to renounce their children, and to deny Christ's lordship over all of life. So as a Christian, representing what Scripture says, you need to bring your child up in a Christian environment, not in the environment of Satan, which is now cultural Marxism. As a patriot and as a Christian, you're to love your neighbor and your neighbor's children. So that means not to abandon your charge as a cultural warrior to fight for school reform, because the children that are continuing in public education, what they're being put into or developed into are socialists. The psychological aspects of education are designed specifically to separate the child from the parental authority, is to marginalize Christianity, marginalize capitalism, marginalize patriotism, and basically ignore the Constitution. If we're going to restore this nation, we have to go by the advice or the observation of John Adams. This Constitution was developed only for a virtuous and religious people. When he said religious, that meant Christian. The majority of the Founding Fathers were Christian. Their worldview was built into the Constitution to provide for a limited government, non-intrusive government, and maximum self-government. So as Christians, as patriots, you need to spend the time to fight for a reformed education process to hopefully, in the end, restore the authority of the Constitution, limit government, and bring back the full self-government of the people. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. We're glad that you're here. And just to wrap up, I think a lot has been said. Now it's time to go do. It's time for action. So we're just going to take a pause in the discussion with a prayer, and then we're going to go take some action, right? Because that's really what we're here to do, is get educated and take action. And Danny Ray is kind enough to honor us with a closing prayer. We're going to invite Danny up here, and then we'll be able to go forward with all the great information that we have to make a difference in the state of Arizona. Danny?
Our Father in heaven, we thank thee for everything.